In a room full of noise, the quietest person is often the one doing the most work. On the surface, they seem perfectly still, as if they have nothing to add to the conversation. But behind that silence, their mind is running a high-speed negotiation in every single moment. Psychology suggests that staying quiet is rarely about having a blank mind or no opinion. It's usually the result of an intense internal effort to process and analyze every social cue. Imagine sitting at a crowded dinner table while everyone around you shares stories and laughs. While others speak, you're busy reading every microexpression and every subtle shift in tone. Cognitive psychology calls this social monitoring, where you track exactly how others perceive the group. Because your brain is so focused on gathering data, you have little energy left to actually speak. You wait for the perfect moment to jump in, but that window often closes before you move. This constant filtering creates a heavy mental load that leaves you exhausted by simple interactions. The more you analyze the room, the harder it feels to actually step into the flow. This silence isn't just a choice, it's a protective shield that can easily become a cage. You are physically there, but you feel like an observer watching a movie instead of an actor. To understand this struggle, we have to look at the invisible editor living inside your head. Silence in a group is rarely about having nothing to say. Instead, it is often the result of an exhausting process of constant internal editing. Every word you consider feels like it is being scrutinized by a harsh, invisible jury. Psychology calls this social evaluative threat, which occurs when our brain treats social judgment as a literal danger. Your survival instincts, the risk of saying something awkward feels like an actual physical attack. You have likely felt this while sitting at a dinner table, holding back a personal story. You start to phrase the sentence, but then you wonder if the punchline will actually land. You worry that someone might interrupt you or respond to your joke with a blank stare. While others are laughing and flowing, you are stuck in a high-speed drafting phase. This happens because your amygdala, the brain's alarm center, is currently on high alert. It triggers the same stress response used to escape a predator, but applies it to a conversation. You aren't just being shy, you are performing a complex risk assessment in real time. On the outside, you look perfectly calm, but your mind is working at a frantic pace. The direct result of this filtering is that the conversation moves faster than your approval process. By the time you finally feel safe enough to speak, the conversation has already moved on. This constant lag makes you feel out of sync, as if you are watching life on delay. Eventually, the sheer mental effort required to maintain this filter becomes too heavy to keep up. You might protect yourself from embarrassment, but you also block the very connection you want. This creates a wall of silence that keeps you safe while making you feel invisible. Have you ever felt like a video camera recording a room instead of a person actually sitting in it? Psychology calls this social monitoring, which is the habit of constantly scanning a room for subtle cues. Your brain treats every raised eyebrow or shift in posture as a vital piece of incoming data. This is often driven by the spotlight effect, where you feel like everyone is hyper-focused on your every move. While others are laughing at a joke, you might find yourself analyzing the host's slightly forced smile. You notice the exact moment the energy in the room shifts before anyone else even senses it. Because your mind is so busy decoding these signals, you quickly run out of mental bandwidth. Research suggests that processing others' emotions leaves less room in your working memory to form sentences. You aren't being quiet because your mind is empty. You're quiet because your internal system is overloaded. The more you watch the room, the more separate you feel from the people actually in it. This hypervigilance keeps you safe from social blunders, but it also prevents you from joining the fun. You essentially become a master at reading the room while remaining a stranger to the conversation. By the time you finally find the perfect thing to say, the topic has usually moved on. This creates a frustrating cycle where your silence makes you anxious, which makes you watch even closer. You might even start wondering if your observations are accurate or just projections of your own fear. This constant data gathering is exhausting, and it often leads to a different kind of psychological trap. You aren't just observing others, you are waiting for a moment that feels safe enough to speak up. But that search for the perfect moment often becomes the very barrier that keeps you invisible. As the conversation picks up speed, the internal pressure to say something meaningful starts to intensify. Psychology calls this intellectual perfectionism, where you feel every word must be flawless before you speak. This creates a rigid internal standard that demands your thoughts be unassailable and completely unique. You might find yourself mentally drafting a sentence only to delete it before it reaches your lips. Imagine sitting in a meeting with a great idea, but checking the facts 3 times first. By the time you finally feel certain enough to speak, the group has already moved on. This happens because your brain is prioritizing being right over being part of the social flow. You aren't trying to be difficult. You are simply trying your best to avoid being wrong. The long-term consequence is a heavy mental tax that makes casual talk feel like a high-stakes test. You end up acting as your own toughest critic, devaluing your insights before anyone else hears them. Research suggests that this intense need for accuracy is often a hidden form of social anxiety. If your contribution isn't perfect, you fear it will expose you to judgment or even ridicule. You might tell yourself that you are just being careful or thorough with your choice of words. But in reality, you are trading the chance for connection for the perceived safety of silence. Think about how many times you've had the right answer but let someone else say it. The frustration you feel in that moment is the real cost of your own internal censorship. You slowly become a spectator in your own life, watching the world move without your input. This self-imposed silence doesn't just keep you safe, it keeps you deeply isolated. The weight of maintaining this perfect silence eventually begins to take a toll on your energy. Staying quiet is surprisingly exhausting, and that mental fatigue is what we need to explore next. You might walk away from a group dinner feeling completely drained without having said a single word. Psychology shows that silence is not a passive state, it is a high-energy act of regulation. This creates a heavy cognitive load, which is the total mental effort used by your working memory. Imagine catching yourself every single time you want to laugh or offer a quick comment. Experts call this inhibitory control, which is the ability to suppress natural impulses to stay safe. When you stay quiet, your brain works overtime to veto every sentence before it is spoken. This constant internal editing leaves no energy left for actually enjoying the conversation around you. You end up feeling like a ghost, physically present but mentally miles away from the group. This leads to ego depletion, where your willpower is too exhausted to handle small stresses later. The result is a strange paradox. The harder you try to fit in, the more disconnected you feel. By the time you get home, you feel more tired than if you had spent the night dancing. This happens because your brain has been in a defensive clinch for several hours straight. You aren't actually resting in that silence. You are fighting a secret battle to stay hidden. That effort eventually creates a profound sense of loneliness, even when you are surrounded by friends. When we stop sharing our internal world, we lose the mirroring that builds human connection. This self-censorship becomes a habit that feels impossible to break, even when you really want to speak. The long-term cost is a creeping feeling that people only ever see the mask you wear. But this exhaustion isn't just internal, it is also about how the world begins to misread you. The hardest part of staying quiet isn't what you feel inside, but what others imagine you feel. Psychology calls this the ambiguity effect, where people fill a lack of information with their own insecurities. When you don't offer a reaction, others have no data to confirm if they are liked. Imagine you are sitting at a dinner party, simply listening and absorbing the conversation. While you feel engaged, the person across from you might see your stillness as cold judgment. This creates a social vacuum that people almost always fill with negative assumptions. Because they can't read your mind, they assume your silence means you feel superior. Research suggests this leads to a self-fulfilling prophecy of social distance. To protect themselves from your perceived judgment, they may start to pull away from you first. You end up being excluded not because people dislike you, but because they are intimidated. This creates a cycle where your attempt to stay safe makes the environment feel more hostile. People may stop asking for your opinion because they assume you aren't interested. This is a reverse halo effect, where one quiet trait colors your entire personality as aloof. The result is a strange paradox. The more you try to blend in, the more you stand out. Your silence becomes a screen onto which everyone projects their own deepest fears. If you don't define your presence, the group will define it for you, often incorrectly. Breaking this cycle requires a shift in how we view the purpose of our own voice. It means moving away from self-protection and toward the actual goal of human connection. Living behind a wall of silence might feel safe, but it often leaves you feeling like a ghost in your own life. Psychology shows that our brains prioritize survival over happiness, choosing silence to avoid the perceived risk of social judgment. This means your quietness isn't a character flaw, but a protective strategy you've learned to rely on over time. When you wait for the perfect moment to speak, you often miss the window for genuine connection entirely. The secret is realizing that most people are too busy worrying about their own image to judge your every word. Instead of trying to be unassailable, try focusing on being present in the natural messiness of the conversation. Think of the last time a friend stumbled over their words. You likely felt closer to them, not less respectful. Each time you speak up, you're teaching your brain that you are finally safe enough to be seen. Your silence is a tool you can use when you want to listen, not a cage you have to live in. Ultimately, the goal isn't to become the loudest person in the room, but the most authentic one.